Where do I get off being so arrogant as a white American in saying that Jesus Christ is the truth? Isn't that incredibly provincial, nationalistic, biased? First point, I am convinced that just because my culture or my parents teach me that 2 + 2 = 4 does not mean that that's wrong. I am convinced that any culture, any parents can speak the truth at times. They're obviously at times going to be mistaken or lie, but they also can speak the truth. So just because there are a lot of people in the United States who believe in Jesus Christ doesn't make Jesus false, right? Just the same way, just because a lot of people in the United States believe that 2 + 2 = 4 doesn't mean that they're false. Okay, that's the first point. Second point, if the center of Christianity was the United States, Western Europe, you'd have an interesting point. But where is the center of followers of Christ today? Africa, South America, and Asia, China. So one of the fascinating historical facts is, although Jesus Christ obviously was a Jew, and in the first century the majority of Christians were Jews, it soon spread to Antioch, and all of a sudden Gentiles became followers of Christ. Then the center of Christianity went down to Alexandria, Egypt, to northern Africa. Then it went up to Eastern Europe, then to Western Europe, then over to the United States. And now it's in Asia, Central America, and Africa. Third point, I hope that you've listened well enough to me to know that never once have I said, believe in Jesus because it's the American way. Believe in Jesus because he goes right along with the American flag and apple pie. I think you'd be a fool to believe in Jesus for those reasons. Instead, what I have said is, go to the source documents written by first century Jews and Gentiles, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Go to the eyewitness accounts that record how Jesus lived, what he taught, how he died, and how he rose from the dead, and check him out. Don't just check out American Christianity.
I'm looking for something outside the Bible, because to me that's more the claim as opposed to the proof. Does that make sense?
To talk more, what are you looking for? What do you need?
I'm looking for, you're talking about first-hand accounts. What are
Yes.
the first-hand accounts that are not in the Bible?
Okay, some of the first-hand accounts that are not in the Bible are the Gnostic Gospels, that are obviously coming from a philosophical position of Gnosticism, which taught the material, the physical is evil, the spiritual is good. And that's why the hero of the Gnostic Gospel of Judas is Judas Iscariot. Well, why would he be the hero? Because he helped Christ get rid of his body. So he's the hero. But you see, it is laced with this Gnostic presupposition that this is evil and the spirit is good. Whereas Genesis to Revelation insists both this and the spirit, the soul, are good because God created both. That is why taking care of your body, if you read the Bible, is so important, because your body's a gift from God. It's not to be trashed. That's why suicide is wrong, because suicide is murdering yourself. And the scriptures say, no, life is a precious gift from God, so don't murder someone else and don't murder yourself. Take care of yourself, take care of your body, but also take care of your soul. So those are the Gnostic Gospels. Now, a Jewish historian named Josephus wrote about Jesus as an historical person. In Antiquities 18.3.3, Josephus talks about the death and supposed resurrection of Christ. In the Mishnah, which is some of the hostile commentary of the Jewish people, there are hostile references to Jesus as a false prophet. So, unmistakably, Jesus was an historical person. The question is he God in human form?
Yeah, I guess that kind of more touches on the real essence of my question. Is
right.
where else is the divinity talked about for him other than in the Bible? Like, is there perhaps an atheist historian that was there during the time that was like, holy crap, this guy's actually doing miracles? Or was he just talking about where he was going and happened to leave happy Christians in his wake?
Well, obviously the Romans were very upset by followers of Christ who would not buy into emperor worship, who insisted that Jesus was Lord. So obviously the Romans were well aware of the fact that Christ followers insisted that he was God, and that's why they wouldn't buy into worshiping Caesar, and that's why they got thrown to the lions in the amphitheater in Rome. So obviously the Romans, who were not followers of Christ, were keenly aware of the fact that these Christ followers insisted Jesus was actually God in human form, and I'm sorry, we're not going to worship the emperor.
I'd like to actually disagree with that account, because see, I really don't think that the Romans cared much or knew anything at all about Jesus while he was alive, or even for a long time afterward. To me, it seems more that the temple officials were the ones who were threatened by Jesus' message within the religion of Judaism, because let's remember, Jesus was a Jew,
right,
and he was speaking about Judaism specifically because it was the air he breathed, it was his environment.
Right.
So it seems more likely to me that instead of somehow the emperor knowing about a fisherman going around and speaking badly about Roman gods, it was more Jesus' Jewish peers who became incensed at this just because of the kind of message. And also, I mean, I believe that Jesus, the lens that's focused on Jesus is focused after his death, not while he's alive.
Okay, who did Nero take to light his gardens? Nero was the Roman emperor. Who did Nero use to put tar on to light his gardens? And he blamed him for the burning of Rome, when actually he burned it. Do you all know that? Christians, okay?
But that's centuries later.
No, that's 60s. That's in the 60s AD, Nero. All right? So you're right. Jesus was a Jew. He lived in Palestine. Jesus never went to Rome. But faith in Christ, because of his resurrection, spread like wildfire, even to Rome. And in the 60s, which is only 30 years after Christ died and rose from the dead, Christians are tarred by Nero, put on sticks, and lit to light his garden. So that's a Roman emperor. So obviously the Romans were highly offended by Christians who insisted, no, we cannot worship Caesar, we will worship Jesus for he is Lord. And there was some tension there, obviously, to the point of martyrdom.
If you look at creatures in their evolution, reptiles are very brutal in their behavior. And as you go up and up and up, mammals, whales, killer whales, bears, things like that, as you keep on going up, you find more empathy and intelligence. And truth be told, a lot of it is chemical reactions. If there is anything out there, I don't think we know what it is. And when we affix ourselves to a religion, it's a way to be sure. But the irony is you can't really be sure. Because I think it's a way to ground yourself. And it's good if you can't, I guess, accept the bleak reality that the only thing we know is what we see and what the matter and energy are.
Okay, but can you live that out?
Yes, easily, because I believe in human justice, human empathy, compassion. I don't think you need to have divine reward or divine retribution for your actions to necessarily encourage the behaviors, but it does make it easy. I won't argue that. It does make it easy to make people think that way.
But wait a second. My whole point to you has been, you hold so wonderfully to justice as a real value. You hold so beautifully to empathy as a real value. Sir, as you pointed out, as I tried to point out to you, if there is no God, justice and empathy are simply biochemical reactions. Do you really buy that?
I buy it entirely, because actually religion itself is a construction of this. Religion itself is a moral compass created by certain people to do that, and they use all these stories to convince people that things are real. And also the god Horus in Egypt was born of a virgin, Isis, begotten son of the only god Osiris, birth heralded by the star Sirius, the morning star. And he also martyred himself. So we can say that there's many similar stories that have these things. They're not necessarily evil, but are they necessarily true is my only point.
Sir, when you study Horus and Osiris and Isis, there is absolutely no historical claim that a virgin gave birth to a child, and there is no historical claim that someone rose from the dead. So to try and compare the Egyptian religion of Osiris and Isis to the Gospels is not accurate. That is total mythology, and the Egyptians are very open about that. They're not making an historical claim. It's all mythology. The claim of the New Testament is history. This historically occurred.
So you think because people have a different interpretation of something, just because somebody saw it, like me and this dude right here,
Yeah.
could completely talk about this event right here in completely different ways. So my friends are going to take that history. His friends are going to take his history.
Yeah.
So how is that more historically accurate than me going up and like taking a picture or video evidence, which is technically scientific history through the use of, you know, capturing an image? How is us talking about it, relating our experiences, more accurate than that right there?
It's real simple. If you and you are standing here, seeing me, talking with me, if you go away and say, Cliffe never spoke out here, you're wrong. If you say Cliffe was out here and spoke, you'd be right. Now, your evaluation of what Cliffe said is totally different, and that's understood, but that's not historic. Historical information is not your evaluation or your evaluation. Historical information is Cliffe was out here and I spoke with him. And if he says, no, Cliffe wasn't out here, and you say Cliffe was out here, then we have a contradiction, don't we? So that's history. History is, I saw this happen. This occurred. And you write it down. Guess what? That's what the New York Times and the LA Times are all about. Who saw what happened? Did this really happen or not? And you don't pull out biology and chemistry and physics to prove what you saw. Instead, it's based on you saw it, and you are a trustworthy, truth-speaking person, and you write it down what you saw. That's history. It's that simple, guys. It's not that complex.
But my history teacher would tell me that the correct way that I analyze history and acquire knowledge about history is comparing verbal sources from first and second hand sources, as well as physical artifacts, cross-comparing them via the scientific method in order to reach some level of veracity.
Good.
In that sense, it's totally attributed to the science.
So archaeology is important when it comes to history. If there's no archaeological evidence for the island of Atlantis, then please don't tell me about something occurring on the island of Atlantis. It doesn't exist. But if you're talking about Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem, Rome, all of a sudden we're talking about archaeologically verifiable places, which is where Jesus was born, where he grew up, where he ministered, and then where his followers spread.
But other people were born and died in Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem.
Right.
And so what makes it exclusive to Jesus that just because these places existed, it somehow adds to the veracity of the accounts of Jesus in those areas?
Well, remember I gave you 4 tests to use to determine historical reliability. Internal consistency, literary style.
I'd say the Gospels fail with internal consistency, but that's just my view.
Yeah, they don't fail. The Gospels pass with flying colors, internal consistency. There are no contradictions in the Gospels.
I mean, except for the couple that I mentioned earlier.
The 2 genealogies are not contradictions. It's a difficult question, we agreed on that.
But neither are they facts, because you're talking about people who are not historians. They're not historians at all. They're going back thousands of years in history and claiming a genealogy for a person that they could not possibly know. Not only is that a contradiction, it's a fabrication.
No, it's no contradiction.
But it's a fabrication. Not only is it a contradiction.
What's the evidence that it's a fabrication?
I don't need evidence that it's a fabrication, because, no.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, well, but okay, well then here's my evidence.
I have given you evidence. It's not a fabrication. Now, what's your evidence that it is a fabrication?
In the same way that I would cross-examine different historical sources and compare one to the other, I can look at that source, I can look at the person who is supposed to have written it, who does not claim themselves to have written it. There is no first-person reference to any author.
So what?
Well, because of that. But what I do know is that you're claiming that these people were, if they were the true authors, they were followers of Jesus, first-hand followers, first-hand accounts.
Yeah.
So they're not writing in a language that they would have understood. They're writing about events they couldn't possibly have known about because scientific history has yet to come along. I mean, that it has to be a fabrication. These genealogies must be a fabrication. How could they know what kind of genealogy? It's a mythical tradition within their religion, these genealogies. They're drawing on mythical traditions.
No, sir, the Jews kept very accurate genealogies. Secondly, Alexander the Great made sure that Greek was the common trade language. That's why the Gospels are written in Greek. Greek was like what English is today. English is the common trade language. And so in the first century, due to the conquest of Alexander the Great, Greek was the common trade language. That is why the Gospels are written in Greek.
They're not written in trade Greek. Some are written in literary Greek, which is even less.
No, they're written in Koine Greek, which was the Greek of that time. Koine Greek.
But some of the Gospels, especially John is written in a metaphysical, literary type of Greek that a first-hand follower of Jesus could not possibly have had a masterful grasp
That is
of.
totally false.
They just could not.
I had to read John in Greek. It's very simple Greek. Now, John is obviously far more philosophical, far more theoretical than Matthew, Mark, and Luke are. You have all the I am statements of Jesus. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the light of the world. I am the bread of life. So yes, John includes more the symbolic teachings of Christ, but that is not something that John was incapable of doing. It's very simple Greek. In fact, when you learn Greek, John is the first gospel you read in Greek because it's the easiest Greek to read.
I'm saying that legitimacy is whatever happens within reality. And what will happen if everyone kills each other is everyone will die. And that's just what will happen. Now, luckily, I feel that humanity is moving in another direction. And I hope we continue to do so, but I really do believe we can do that just by saying, hey, I wouldn't like you to kill me. I'm not going to kill you. I really think we can be interconnected enough to enhance our empathy without a prime source.
Also, the basis of evolutionary psychology is that we're supposed to want to evolve and make our genes spread. So we're not going to kill everyone because we want our species to continue and thrive. Thus, that's why we're nice to each other and we don't disrespect each other, because we want to make sure that everyone else will thrive with us. Our genetics want us to continue living. It's something that part of us are ingrained with. It's just how evolution happens. We're supposed, like, whether we want to or not, we're going to evolve. But that's what our genes are wanting us to do. That's why we want to reproduce. That's why we want to keep moving.
Evolution teaches the survival of the fittest.
That's not true. Evolution teaches survival of the best fit. It can, like, doesn't have to be the fittest. It doesn't necessarily mean the top-notch person. It just is whoever's best at that time, at that environment. It's all in the environmental context.
And that's a big reason why we keep, like, being nice to each other, is because we need each other to survive. Back whenever we were hunting the plains and everything, we needed a large group so that we could stay alive and we would fight off predators and be able to sleep through the night with someone watching.
Okay. And all I'm saying is there is more to my relationships than a desire to survive. I am convinced that we're able to love each other, to give to each other, to sacrifice for each other. I am convinced that we're able to take care of handicapped people and promote their well-being. I'm convinced that we're able to stand against racism and to stand for the value and dignity of all of human life. But evolution does not give the basis, atheistic evolution does not give the basis for the value of any human life. It just happens. And if you put it so well, Ryan, it just happens.
Well,
so if what just happens is that I want his money, and so I go up and knife him to get his money, that just happens. There's nothing wrong with it. It just happens. Or if I want to go up to him and give him money out of my wallet so he can have a better dinner, that just happens. My point is, there's more to reality than just what happens. There's a value of justice, a value of love, that is not a chemical reaction. It comes from a free will. And I insist that I am able to freely hate him, or I am freely able to love him and respect him. I am freely able to be a deadbeat dad, an abusive husband, or I am free to care for my children and care for my wife. I don't have to do either. Now, come on, guys. You know that's true. You've experienced it. You know I'm not telling you a fantasy line. Some of you have been hurt deeply. Not because your mom or dad had to do something. They chose to do something. And you got hurt big time. You also know that your mom and dad did some incredibly fine things and loved you, many of you. They didn't have to love you. Yes, there's a biological drive. Yes, birds like to protect little baby birds. Yes, that's part of it. But you can contradict that nature. You can contradict that instinct. You have a free will. Guess what, guys? The only way you can have a free will is if there's more to reality than matter and energy. There's got to be some type of personal God who creates you with a free will, which means you're not just a chemical reaction. You have a soul. You have personhood. Come on, guys. That's the way you live your life. That makes sense. That's why you should put your faith in Christ, because he makes sense of how you experience life. Have you ever gotten frustrated that God doesn't answer your prayers more powerfully? Have you ever been frustrated that God doesn't prove himself more clearly to your skeptical friends or to you? I have. The self-restraint of God, the humility of God, is difficult to take. I want a God who's going to pull the fireworks off immediately. I want a God who's going to answer all my prayers just the way I would like him to. And I want a God who will give proof so that all my skeptical friends will believe in his Son Christ. But he doesn't do it that way, does he? The amazing self-restraint of God is incredible. In fact, often I'm tempted to say, what's going on? I think the answer to that question is, God respects our free will. God is not going to prove himself to you and to me. Why? Because God is not so much interested in us intellectually agreeing to his existence. Rather, God, who is a personal being, loves us, and he wants us to establish a relationship with him. That is why he sent his Son Christ to planet Earth, to live a sinless life, and then to bleed and die on a cross to forgive us and to woo us back into a right relationship with himself. God does not ravish us. God woos us. And that's the mystery that Paul is struggling through in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, where he writes, beginning in verse 22, Jews demand miraculous signs, and Greek looks for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom, and the weakness of God is more powerful than man's strength. What's he talking about? When you read the Gospels and look at Christ bleeding and dying on a cross for your sin, something has got to happen inside. Either you get hard, skeptical, crusty, and push him away, or you respond in love. What does it take for God to woo us into a right relationship with himself? It takes love. And that is exactly what he revealed so clearly through the cross of Christ. God loves you and me unconditionally. He respects our free will. He will not coerce, he will not force, he will not manipulate you or me. He will set the truth forth plainly, and then we have to decide. It is always disturbing to listen to a person say, well, Cliff, because God is going to judge us, it means he strips us of our free will. False. When you grow up, you eventually begin to realize, although I am free to make one of many decisions, I am not free to escape the consequences of whatever decision I make. Yes, you and I are free to reject Christ. We are not free to escape the consequences of that rejection. We will spend eternity separate from him. But we are also free to respond to his love because we choose to. Not because he's forced us to, not because he's coerced us to, but because he has wooed us in his love and we choose to trust in him. Have you made that decision? Have you made your own personal decision to trust in Jesus Christ? I'd like to invite you to do that right now. In the quietness of your own soul, ask Christ to forgive you, trust in him, and commit your life to him. Why did Jesus die on a cross? The Bible is fascinating in the way it presents different word pictures. A word out of the legal system the Bible uses to explain the cross of Christ is justification. Christ died on the cross to make us right before a holy, just judge, the living God. He died to justify us, to forgive us, to make us right. In spite of the fact that you and I have broken the moral law of God, in spite of the fact that you and I are guilty, Christ offers us forgiveness. He wants to justify us before God. Have you been justified? One day you and I will stand before God and we will give an answer to him for the way we chose to live our lives. At times we've made very good decisions. At times we've made wrong decisions. At times even horrific decisions. Christ bled and died on a cross to justify you and me, to forgive us and to give us the gift of life eternal. Right now, in the quietness of your own soul, I encourage you to ask Christ to forgive you, to justify you. Put your faith in him. Trust that he died on the cross for you to give your life eternal. And he promises to forgive. He promises to love on you throughout eternity. He promises to give you eternal life. Right now, God bless you as you make that most important decision. I'm the pastor of Grace Community Church. We meet every Sunday morning, 9:30 at Sachs Middle School in New Canaan, Connecticut. Take the Merritt Parkway to exit 37, go to the end of the ramp, take a left onto Route 124, go approximately 1 mile and take a right into Sachs Middle School. I'd love to invite you to join us this Sunday, 9:30, Auditorium, Sachs Middle School, New Canaan, Connecticut. Thanks for joining us for these few minutes. Have a great day.